There's a camera in your office. A 10-year-old girl uncovered a secret inside a billionaire's mansion, one that could bring down his entire empire. In the quiet corridors of one of America's most powerful estates, a secret was hiding in plain sight. For 2 years, Helen Caldwell and her 10-year-old daughter, Maya, lived above the garage, working quietly in the service of billionaire inventor Grant Sterling. To most, Sterling's life looked perfect: wealth, brilliance, and a charming fiancée who seemed to bring light into his world. But Maya had learned from her late grandfather, a decorated soldier, to notice what didn't belong. And one ordinary afternoon, she saw something no one else did, something hidden inside a simple gift. A detail so small it could be overlooked, yet so dangerous it could destroy everything. What she found would change their lives forever. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. Her grandfather taught her that true danger rarely announces itself. 10-year-old Maya adjusted the dust ruffle on the antique bed, her movements precise and quiet. She was a ghost in this grand house, a role her mother said would keep them safe. Maya Caldwell knew the sounds of the house better than anyone. She knew the gentle groan the third floorboard made when Mr. Grant paced in his study late at night. She knew the whisper of the automatic sprinklers an hour before dawn. She knew the soft click of the thermostat adjusting the air by a single degree. Her mother, Helen, said it was a good thing to be quiet and watchful. "We are here to work, sweetie," she would say, her voice soft but firm. "The best work is done when no one even knows you're there." For 2 years, they had lived in the small apartment above the garage of Grant Sterling's sprawling estate. Helen was his housekeeper, a position she'd taken after Maya's father passed away, leaving them with little more than memories and a mountain of medical bills. To Maya, Mr. Grant was a kind but distant figure, a giant who moved through the enormous rooms with a quiet sadness in his eyes. He was always polite, always remembered her name, but he looked at her the way one looks at a well-tended piece of furniture. Present, but not truly seen. Her grandfather would have understood. He had been a decorated soldier, a man who saw the world in details others missed. Situational awareness may bug, he used to tell her, tapping the side of his head. It's not about being scared. It's about being ready. Look for what doesn't belong. He had passed away last year, but his lessons were etched into her mind like carvings in an old tree. And something in this house did not belong. It was Vanessa. Vanessa Croft was Mr. Grant's fiancée. She was beautiful, with hair the color of dark honey and a laugh that sounded like music. She brought light and color into the quiet, gray corners of Mr. Grant's life. When she was there, he smiled more. He stopped pacing at night. To everyone, she was perfect. A perfect match for the brilliant, lonely billionaire who had invented a new kind of solar technology that promised to change the world. But Maya watched. She saw things. She saw the way Vanessa's smile was a little too bright when she talked to the delivery men. She saw how her eyes would scan a room when she thought no one was looking, not with appreciation, but with assessment. It was the same look her grandfather had when he studied a map, looking for weaknesses. And she noticed how Vanessa's stories sometimes changed. Small things. A story about her childhood in Chicago would, a week later, become a story about growing up in Boston. Helen said Maya was being imaginative. "She's just nervous about the wedding, honey. Rich people are different." Today, Vanessa had brought another gift for Mr. Grant's home office. It was a large, framed painting of a stormy seascape. "To remind you of the power of nature, darling," Vanessa had cooed, kissing Mr. Grant's cheek. Every great mind needs to be inspired. He had been pleased, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He directed the staff to hang it on the wall opposite his large oak desk. Now, hours later, Maya stood in the hallway, a small dust rag in her hand. Her mother had asked her to do a final pass of the upstairs hallway before they went home for the day. The door to the office was slightly ajar. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows, making dust motes dance in the air. The house was quiet. Mr. Grant was in a meeting downtown. Vanessa had left for a charity luncheon. Maya felt a pull toward the office. It was a room she was rarely allowed to enter. It was Mr. Grant's sanctuary, a place of leather-bound books and the faint, clean scent of his work. She pushed the heavy door open a few more inches and slipped inside. The room was just as she imagined. Bookshelves stretched to the ceiling. A large desk was covered in neat stacks of paper and a sleek, silver laptop. And there on the wall was the new painting. The dark, churning waves seemed to roil with a life of their own. It was beautiful, but it felt wrong in this calm, orderly room. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. Look for what doesn't belong. She walked closer, her sneakers silent on the thick Persian rug. She looked at the heavy, ornate gold frame. Her eyes traced its edges. And then she saw it. Tucked into the deep scrollwork at the top right corner was a tiny, black circle. It was no bigger than the head of a pin. It was perfectly flush with the wood, almost invisible. Almost. As she stared, a minuscule red light blinked once, a tiny spark in the shadows. It was so fast, she thought she'd imagined it. She held her breath, her heart starting to pound against her ribs. She waited. 1 minute. 2. There it was again. A single, silent blink. It wasn't part of the painting. It wasn't part of the frame. It was something else. Something hidden. Something that was watching. A chill traced its way down her spine. The empty room suddenly felt crowded. She backed away slowly, her eyes locked on the tiny black. She slipped out of the office, pulling the door back to the exact position she had found it. Her hands were trembling. She found her mother in the main kitchen, wiping down the marble countertops. All done, sweetie? Helen asked, not looking up. Maya nodded, her throat too tight to speak. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I think I feel a little sick, Maya lied. It wasn't a complete lie. Her stomach was twisted into a tight, cold knot. Her mother's face softened with concern. She placed a cool hand on Maya's forehead. You don't feel warm. Maybe you're just tired. Let's get home. As they walked across the manicured lawn to their small apartment, Maya couldn't shake the image of that tiny, blinking eye. Vanessa had brought it into the house. She had placed it on the wall where it could see everything. Mr. Grant's desk. His computer. Every paper he read. Every call he made. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, the sounds of the estate outside her window offering no comfort. She thought about Mr. Grant, with his sad eyes and his quiet kindness. He gave her mother a good job. He paid for her to go to a nice school. He had once seen her struggling with a math problem and had sat with her for an hour, explaining long division in a way that finally made sense. He trusted Vanessa. He was going to marry her. And she was watching him. Maya knew she had to do something. But who would believe her? A 10-year-old girl. The maid's daughter. Her own mother had told her she was just being imaginative. What would Mr. Grant do? He would probably smile his distant, polite smile and tell her not to worry. He would believe his beautiful, charming fiancée over the quiet little girl who lived above his garage. Her grandfather's face floated in her mind. He was a hero, they said. But he always told her real courage wasn't about fighting battles. It's about speaking the truth, Maybug, he'd said. Especially when your voice is shaking. Her voice was shaking just thinking about it. But she knew he was right. She had to tell him. She had to find a way to make him listen. The next day, Maya shadowed her mother, waiting for an opportunity. It came late in the afternoon. Mr. Grant was in his office, his posture rigid as he spoke on the phone. His voice was tense. Maya could hear snippets through the door. The prototype isn't ready. No, the security is absolute. We can't afford any leaks. Vanessa was gone again, this time to a spa appointment. It was now or never. Maya took a deep breath. Her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. She walked to the doorway of the office and stood there, waiting. He was so absorbed in his work, his face bathed in the blue light of his monitor, that he didn't notice her for a full 5 minutes. The long shadows of the afternoon stretched across the floor like grasping fingers. Finally, he ended his call with a frustrated sigh and rubbed his temples. He glanced up and saw her. A brief flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by his usual, gentle smile. Hello, Maya. Is there something you need? Her heart hammered against her chest. Words failed her. All she could think about was the blinking red eye in the painting behind him. She saw Vanessa's perfect smile and heard her musical laugh. She saw her own mother's worried face, telling her not to make trouble. Maya, Mr. Grant prompted, his brow furrowed with mild concern. She took another shaky breath. She couldn't say it out loud, not here, not with the walls listening. She walked forward, her steps feeling heavy as if moving through water. She stopped beside his large leather chair and tugged gently on the sleeve of his expensive suit jacket. He looked down at her, confused. "What is it?" She leaned in close, her blonde hair brushing against his shoulder. She raised herself on her toes and brought her mouth close to his ear. The words came out in a rush, a torrent of fear and certainty that could no longer be held back. "There's a camera in your office," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "And it's not yours." The effect was instantaneous. Grant Sterling froze. Every muscle in his body went tight. The polite, distant smile vanished, replaced by an expression of sharp, cold shock. The air in the room grew thick and heavy. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared at the wall in front of him, but Maya knew he wasn't seeing it. He was hearing her words echo in the silent, watchful room. And for the first time since she had met him, she knew he was truly, finally, listening. Grant Sterling was a man who dealt in facts, in data, in the predictable and elegant logic of code. His world was one of control and precision. For a long moment after Maya's whisper, that world seemed to tilt on its axis. The quiet hum of his computer, the distant chime of a grandfather clock in the hall, all of it faded into a roaring silence in his ears. He did not turn to look at the small girl beside him. His gaze remained fixed on the stormy seascape, but he was seeing it for the first time. He saw the heavy, opulent frame. He saw the way it was positioned to offer a perfect, panoramic view of his entire workspace. He saw Vanessa's beaming face as she presented it to him, her words echoing in his memory. "To remind you of the power of nature, darling." Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head and looked down at Maya. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resolve. In her small, upturned face, he saw an honesty so profound it was like a physical force. She wasn't playing a game. She wasn't telling a story. She was delivering a warning. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly steady. "Show me," he said, his voice low and serious, stripped of its usual polite distance. Maya's small hand came up and pointed a trembling finger toward the top right corner of the painting. In the fancy part of the frame, she whispered, "It blinks." Grant rose from his chair, his movements fluid and silent. He was a tall man, and his shadow fell over the desk as he approached the wall. He didn't need to stand on his toes. He leaned in, his eyes, trained to spot the smallest flaw in a line of code, scanning the ornate scrollwork. For a moment, he saw nothing but gilded wood. He felt a fleeting wave of something. Was it disappointment? Relief? Then, his focus sharpened, and he saw it. The tiny, black circle, so perfectly embedded it looked like a flaw in the craftsmanship. He stood perfectly still, watching, waiting. The seconds stretched into an eternity. The house was silent around them. Then it happened. A single, almost imperceptible blink of red light. A cold, hard knot formed in Grant's stomach. It was the feeling he got just before a major system breach, the icy premonition of an unseen enemy already inside the gates. He had built an empire on security, on protecting secrets, his own and his clients'. He had surrounded himself with impenetrable firewalls, both digital and personal. Yet here, in the heart of his sanctuary, a spy had been hung on his wall with a kiss and a smile. He stepped back from the painting, his face a mask of cold fury. He looked back at Maya, who was watching him, her small body tense. He knelt down so he was at her eye level, a gesture that surprised them both. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice still a low murmur. "My grandpa was a soldier," Maya said simply, as if that explained everything. "He taught me to look for things that don't belong. The painting, it's angry. Your office is quiet." And it was new. It was the simple, devastating logic of a child, yet it cut through layers of adult complexity with the sharpness of a razor. He, the tech genius, the billionaire visionary, had seen a gift. She, the maid's daughter, had seen a threat. "You are a very smart girl, Maya," he said, and the words felt inadequate. He felt a surge of gratitude so intense it almost staggered him. This child, this quiet little girl he had barely noticed, may have just saved him from a catastrophe he couldn't yet begin to measure. "You did the right thing by telling me." He glanced at the door, then back at the painting. His mind was racing, calculating variables, assessing threats. Who was behind this? And why? The immediate suspect was, of course, the one who had brought the Trojan horse into his home. Vanessa. A wave of nausea washed over him. Vanessa, his vibrant, loving fiancée. The woman who had pulled him from the gray fog of his work and reminded him what it felt like to live. Was it possible? Was her laughter a lie? Were her kisses a betrayal? The thought was a physical blow, leaving him winded. He wanted to reject it, to dismiss it as impossible, but the blinking red eye on his wall was a fact. A piece of data that could not be denied. "This is going to be our secret for now," he said, his eyes meeting Maya's. "Can you do that for me? Can you pretend that this conversation never happened?" Maya nodded solemnly. She understood secrets. Her life was built on them. Be quiet. Be invisible. Don't cause trouble. Your mother cannot know, Grant continued, his voice firm. Not yet. I don't want to put her in a difficult position. This is a very serious matter. It's for her protection, too. Do you understand? Yes, sir, she whispered. Good girl. He stood up, the warmth leaving his expression, replaced by a chilling focus. He was no longer just Grant Sterling, the lonely billionaire. He was the man who had built a fortress and just discovered a traitor within its walls. Go find your mother. It's time for you both to go home. As Maya slipped out of the room, Grant turned back to the painting. He didn't touch it. He didn't disable it. That would alert the watchers that they had been discovered. No, he would leave it in place. He would let them think they were still safe, still unseen. He would use their own weapon against them. He would feed it false information. He would let them watch him work, while he worked on discovering them. His mind was already constructing a plan, a complex algorithm of misdirection and counter-espionage. He walked back to his desk and sat down, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. He pulled up the security schematics for his entire estate. Every camera, every motion sensor, every digital lock. He began to cross-reference access logs with Vanessa's schedule. When had she been alone in the house? Who had she met with? Who had delivered this painting? He worked for hours, the setting sun casting long, ominous shadows across the room. He felt a profound sense of isolation, a loneliness deeper than any he had ever known. The woman he was going to marry, the woman he had led into the deepest, most vulnerable parts of his life, was likely an enemy, a spy. The betrayal was so immense, so personal, it was hard to breathe. The only person in this entire, sprawling estate he could trust was a 10-year-old girl. He paused his work and looked at the family photo on his desk. It was of him with his parents, taken years ago, before they had passed. They had always warned him to be careful who he let into his life. Your work makes you a target, son, his father had said. And the most dangerous threats will come with a smile, not a weapon. He had thought he was being careful. He had run a background check on Vanessa, of course. It had come back pristine. A degree from a good university, a history of working for reputable charities, a family of modest means from the Midwest. It was all perfect. Too perfect. He realized now that it was likely a fabrication, a carefully constructed legend designed to fool him. And it had worked. A quiet rage began to build inside him. It was not a hot, explosive anger, but a cold, hard fire. He had been played. He had been made a fool of in his own home. And his life's work, a technology that had the potential to provide clean, cheap energy to the entire planet, was at risk. He thought of Maya again. Her grandfather was a war veteran. She had his blood in her veins. The blood of a watcher, a protector. He made a silent vow. He would protect her. He would protect her mother. And he would uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it was. The blinking red eye in the painting watched him, oblivious. The game had changed. The prey now knew he was being hunted, and he was about to become the hunter. He minimized the security files and opened a blank document. He began to type, his fingers flying across the keys. It was the beginning of a new project, a new firewall. But this one was not for his company. It was for his life. And at the top of the document, he typed a single code name, a tribute to the small, quiet girl who had opened his eyes. He called it Project Maybug. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. To the outside world, and even within the walls of his own home, Grant Sterling was unchanged. He was the same focused, slightly distant billionaire he had always been. He discussed wedding plans with Vanessa, tasted cakes, and reviewed floral arrangements. He smiled. He nodded. He played the part of the devoted fiancé, and he did it with a chilling perfection that surprised even himself. But beneath the surface, a silent, secret war was being waged. His office, once a sanctuary, had become a stage. He knew the camera was always watching, It's unseen, I recording his every move. So, he gave it a performance. He held staged, confidential phone calls, speaking in code about fabricated setbacks in his solar project. He left decoy documents on his desk, filled with complex but ultimately useless schematics. He would feign frustration, rubbing his temples and sighing, all for the benefit of his hidden audience. Every moment was a calculated lie. His true work began late at night, long after the rest of the house was asleep. He moved his base of operations to a small, secure server room in the basement, a place only he could access. There, surrounded by the cool hum of machinery, he delved into Vanessa's life. He didn't just read the background check he'd paid for. He tore it apart, line by line. He discovered it was a fortress of lies, built with the precision of an expert. The university she claimed to have attended had no record of a Vanessa Croft. The charities she had supposedly worked for were legitimate, but their employee records showed no one by that name. Her family in the Midwest? They existed, a pleasant, middle-aged couple named Croft. But a deeper dive into public records showed their only child, a daughter, had died in a car accident 15 years ago. The woman he knew as Vanessa Croft was a ghost, a carefully constructed identity, worn like a mask. The discovery did not bring him the sharp pain he had expected. The initial shock had numbed him, leaving behind a cold, clear sense of purpose. He was no longer dealing with a personal betrayal. He was dealing with a professional threat of the highest order. Someone had invested a great deal of time and money to place this woman in his life. The question was, who? And what did they want? The most obvious answer was his solar technology. It was revolutionary, a patented system for converting sunlight into energy with unprecedented efficiency. It was worth billions, perhaps trillions, in the right hands. It could change the global energy market overnight. It was a prize worth lying for, stealing for, maybe even killing for. Meanwhile, Maya carried the weight of their secret like a smooth, heavy stone in her pocket. It was a constant presence, a reminder of the strange, silent alliance she had formed with the master of the house. She watched him from a distance. She saw the way he smiled at Vanessa, but she noticed his eyes didn't smile with him. She saw him talking on the phone in his office and knew he was putting on a show. A strange, unspoken understanding flowed between them. Sometimes, their eyes would meet across a long hallway or a grand room, and for a fleeting second, he would give her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent acknowledgement. I remember. I know. We are in this together. It was a heavy burden for a 10-year-old. Her mother, Helen, noticed a change in her. Maya was quieter than usual, her gaze often distant. Is everything all right at school, sweetie? Helen would ask, smoothing Maya's blonde hair. Everything's fine, Mom, Maya would reply, the lie feeling sticky on her tongue. She couldn't tell her mother. Mr. Grant had forbidden it, and Maya understood why. Her mother was a worrier. She would panic. She might even confront Vanessa, and that would be dangerous. So Maya kept the secret locked away, guarding it with a solemnity that was far beyond her years. Her quiet watchfulness, the skill her grandfather had taught her, was now her most important job. She paid attention to Vanessa, not with suspicion, but with a detached curiosity. She noted the woman's habits. Vanessa always took a walk in the gardens at precisely 10 a.m., speaking quietly into her phone. She always used a specific laptop, a sleek black one, never the tablets or other devices scattered around the house. And she received a package every Tuesday from the same courier service, a small, nondescript box she would take to her room and open in private. Maya didn't know what any of it meant, but she memorized it all, filing the details away. She was the lookout, the sentry. One afternoon, while her mother was busy in the main part of the house, Maya was tidying up the upstairs sitting room. It was adjacent to the master suite where Vanessa was staying. The door was slightly ajar. Maya could hear Vanessa's voice, low and hurried. It was the same tone she used on her morning walks. Maya froze, her small dust cloth clutched in her hand. The timeline is getting tight, Vanessa said. He's getting close to the final launch. We need the primary key codes before then. There was a pause. Maya held her breath, her ears straining. No, he doesn't suspect a thing, Vanessa continued, a hint of amusement in her voice. He's completely smitten. Thinks I'm the best thing that ever happened to him. It's almost too easy. Another pause. Don't worry about the maid and her kid. They're invisible. They don't see anything. A cold spike of anger shot through Maya. Invisible. That's what they thought she was. A ghost. A piece of furniture. It was the mistake all the villains made in her grandfather's old war movies. They always underestimated the quiet ones. Vanessa's voice dropped even lower. I'll have the full data stream by the end of the week. Just be ready for the transfer. Croft out. The line went dead. Maya heard the snap of a laptop closing. She scurried away from the door, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Primary key codes. Data stream. Transfer. The words were from Mr. Grant's world, a world of computers and secrets. And Vanessa was stealing them. She had to tell him. She had to tell him now. She found him in the library, staring out the large bay window that overlooked the sprawling gardens. He seemed lost in thought, his handsome face etched with a weary sadness. He looked up as she entered, and his expression softened slightly. Maya, he said. Everything all right? She walked up to him, her small hands twisting the fabric of her dress. She didn't have to whisper this time. They were alone. She was on her computer, Maya said, her voice clear and steady despite the fear fluttering in her stomach. She said she needs the primary key codes before the launch. She said you don't suspect anything. She said we're invisible. Grant's jaw tightened. Every muscle in his face seemed to turn to granite. He stared down at Maya, and in his eyes, she saw the cold fire she had seen once before, but this time it was burning hotter. The information confirmed his suspicions, but hearing it, knowing that Vanessa had been laughing at him behind his back, turned the professional into the personal. She called herself Croft before she hung up, Maya added, remembering the last detail. Croft, Grant repeated, the name tasting like poison. It was her operational name. A professional spy, using a dead girl's identity. He knelt again, just as he had in his office. He took both of her small hands in his. Thank you, Maya, he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It sounded like anger, but also like gratitude. You are not invisible. You are the most important person in this entire house. You are my eyes and ears. Your grandfather would be very proud. The praise warmed her more than any words she had ever heard. He believed her. He needed her. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice small. A grim smile touched Grant's lips. She wants the key codes, he said, thinking aloud. She wants the data stream. Well, he looked directly into Maya's eyes. I think it's time we give her exactly what she's looking for. He was going to set a trap, and the bait would be the very thing they were trying to steal. The game was escalating, moving from silent observation to active engagement. And Maya, the invisible girl, was standing right at the center of it. Grant Sterling's mind, a place accustomed to navigating the intricate pathways of code and logic, was now focused on a single, elegant objective, building the perfect trap. The information Maya had provided was the final piece of the puzzle. He now knew what they wanted, the primary key codes to his entire solar energy project. And he knew when they wanted it, before the official launch. He would not disappoint them. The following days saw a subtle shift in the household. Helen, Maya's mother, was given a series of tasks that kept her and Maya primarily on the ground floor. I'm having the upstairs wing deep cleaned and sanitized, Helen, Grant had explained, his tone casual. Some investors are coming for a tour, and I want everything to be perfect. It was a plausible lie, one that kept them safely out of the operational theater he was creating. His real work was a whirlwind of controlled, clandestine activity. In the secure basement server room, he began to construct a digital honeypot. It was a phantom version of his entire solar energy project, a complex and beautiful forgery. He created fake, primary key codes, long strings of characters that looked authentic but would, when used, do two things: alert him instantly and trigger a traceback protocol that would begin hunting the user's location. He then built the data stream Vanessa was so eager to acquire. It was a massive file, layered with dummy schematics, falsified financial projections, and decoy research data. Buried deep within the file, like a digital isotope, was a tracking beacon so sophisticated it would be virtually undetectable. The moment the file was opened on an external network, it would begin transmitting its location back to him. It was the most intricate piece of code he had ever written. He worked with a feverish intensity, fueled by coffee, anger, and a grim determination. Every line of code was a brick in the wall of his defense. Every fabricated data point was a piece of bait. During this time, He saw little of Maya, but he felt her presence. He knew she was watching, her silence a comforting and steady counterpoint to the chaos of his secret work. He left a small, sealed note for her on the kitchen counter one morning, tucked under a freshly baked cookie from the chef. The note simply said, "Thank you, my friend. We are almost there." Maya found it before her mother did and tucked it into her pocket. The words made her feel tall and brave. She wasn't just the maid's daughter anymore. She was his friend. She was a part of the plan. The performance in the main house continued. Grant became even more affectionate toward Vanessa. He brought her flowers. He surprised her with a diamond bracelet she had admired in a magazine. He spoke of their future, of the children they might have, of the life they would build together. Each loving word, each tender gesture, was a carefully sharpened knife. He had to keep her close, keep her confident and unsuspecting, until the trap was ready to be sprung. For Vanessa, it was a sign that her mission was succeeding beyond her wildest dreams. She reported to her handler that the target was completely under her control, his judgment clouded by his affection for her. She saw his late nights and his weary expression as stress about the upcoming launch, not suspicion. Her confidence grew, and with it, a fatal carelessness. The moment came on a Thursday evening. Grant had announced that he had finally completed the master file for the project. He backed it up onto a sleek, silver flash drive, a piece of technology so common it was almost beneath notice. He then staged another phone call in his office, knowing the camera in the painting was watching. "It's done," he said into the receiver, his voice filled with a convincing mix of triumph and exhaustion. "Everything. The primary codes, the final projections, the whole thing is right here on this drive." He held it up for a moment, as if showing it to his caller, but his true audience was the tiny black lens across the room. "I'm locking it in the desk safe. I'll transfer it to the main lab servers tomorrow morning. Yes, it's the only copy outside the network. I'll see you then." He hung up, dramatically wiped his brow, and walked to his heavy oak desk. He unlocked a small, hidden safe built into the side, placed the silver flash drive inside, and spun the combination lock. Then he left the office, shutting the door behind him. It was a perfectly set stage. The bait was in place. He found Maya in the kitchen, helping her mother polish the silver. He caught her eye and gave a single, slow nod. Tonight. Maya felt a jolt, a mixture of fear and excitement. The waiting was almost over. Grant ate dinner with Vanessa that night in the formal dining room. He was the perfect picture of a man in love, celebrating a professional triumph. He poured champagne. He toasted her. "To our future, Vanessa. To all the amazing things we're going to build together." Her smile was radiant, her eyes sparkling in the candlelight. "To us," she said, raising her glass. As she sipped the champagne, she was already thinking of the flash drive in his desk, just one floor above them. Later, Grant feigned exhaustion. "I'm going to turn in early, darling. This project has taken everything out of me." He kissed her goodnight at the top of the grand staircase. "Don't stay up too late." "I won't," she promised, her voice like honey. Grant went to his bedroom, but not to sleep. He went to the adjoining study, a smaller, more personal office. On his monitor, a single screen was active. It showed a live feed from a tiny, fiber-optic camera he had installed that morning, a camera aimed directly at the safe in his main office desk. He sat in the darkness, the only light coming from the screen, and he waited. Maya, in her small room above the garage, was also waiting. She couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, looking out at the main house, a silent sentinel. She thought of her grandfather. He had told her that the moments before a battle were the hardest part. The waiting, the not knowing. She hugged her knees to her chest and watched the lights of the house, her heart a tiny drum in the vast quiet of the night. For 2 hours, nothing happened. The video feed on Grant's monitor was still and silent. Then, just after 1 a.m., a shadow moved at the edge of the frame. The office door creaked open, and a figure slipped inside. It was Vanessa. She wore dark clothing, her beautiful face tense with concentration. She moved with a silent, practiced grace that was utterly at odds with the charming, slightly clumsy woman she pretended to be. She went straight to the desk. Grant watched, his breath held, his hands clenched into fists. Vanessa knelt and began to work on the safe. She pulled a small, electronic device from her pocket, a sophisticated lockpicker. She attached it to the combination dial. The device whirred softly. On Grant's screen, a timer appeared. It took her less than 90 seconds. There was a soft click. The safe was open. Vanessa reached inside and pulled out the silver flash drive. She held it in her palm for a moment, a look of pure triumph on her face. It was a look Grant had never seen before. It was cold, predatory, and utterly devoid of the warmth she had shown him for months. In that moment, he saw the real woman, the ghost who had invaded his life. She slipped the drive into her pocket, closed the safe, and spun the dial. She moved back to the door, silent as a cat, and disappeared into the hallway, closing the office door behind her. The room was empty again. The trap had been sprung. The bait was taken. In his dark study, Grant Sterling leaned back in his chair, a grim smile on his face. He typed a single command into his computer. Activate protocol, Maybug. Across the estate, in her own room, Vanessa inserted the flash drive into her sleek, black laptop. She thought she was stealing his life's work. She had no idea she was about to lead him directly to the people she worked for. The hunt had begun. The house was still. The moon cast a pale, silver light over the manicured lawns. To any observer, it was a picture of perfect tranquility. But in the basement server room, Grant Sterling was at war. On his main monitor, a world map glowed. A single, pulsing red that was moving through the pre-dawn city streets. It was Vanessa. The beacon in the fake data stream was working perfectly. He watched her car snake through the city, her route efficient and direct. There were no random turns, no attempts to throw off a tail she didn't know existed. She was confident. She was arrogant. She was heading straight into his web. Grant had another screen active, this one showing a cascade of data. It was the traceback protocol he had embedded in the fake primary key codes. The moment Vanessa, or whoever she was working for, attempted to use those codes to access his network, the trap would spring. It would be like a digital dye pack, staining everyone and everything it touched. He watched the red dot on the map come to a stop. It hovered over a sleek, modern office building in the heart of the city's financial district. Grant zoomed in on the address. A cold dread, heavier and more sickening than anything he had felt before, began to spread through him. He knew that building. He knew it intimately. It was the headquarters of his own company, Sterling Innovations. For a moment, he couldn't process it. Why would she go there? Was she meeting someone? A low-level employee she had bribed? The possibilities churned in his mind, each one more disturbing than the last. He watched the dot move, tracking her as she went through the lobby, into an elevator, and up. It stopped on the 40th floor, the executive floor. His heart hammered against his ribs. There were only a handful of offices on that floor. His own, his chief operating officers, and the office of David Chun, his chief financial officer, his best friend since college. David, the man who had been his best man at his first wedding, the man who was godfather to a child he had lost, the man who had stood by him, shoulder to shoulder, as they built their company from a garage startup into a global powerhouse. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. There had to be another explanation. Then, a new alert flashed on his other screen. It was the one he had been waiting for. Security breach attempt detected. Phantom key codes activated. Traceback protocol initiated. Origin point. SI Executive Network. Office 40C. Office 40C. David Chen's office. The world seemed to drop out from under Grant. The betrayal of Vanessa was a sharp, painful cut. But this was a wound to the soul. David had been his brother in all but blood. He had trusted him with everything. His company, his secrets, his life. And all this time, David had been the serpent at the heart of it all. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The small financial discrepancies he had overlooked. The strange project delays David had blamed on red tape. The way David had been the first person to enthusiastically endorse Vanessa, telling Grant, "She's perfect for you, man. Don't let this one get away." He hadn't been giving friendly advice. He had been handling his asset. The woman he knew as Vanessa was just a tool. A beautiful, sophisticated weapon aimed at his heart, and David had been the one holding it. In his mind's eye, Grant saw David's friendly, smiling face, and he felt a rage so pure and so cold it burned. He had been mourning a lost friendship while David was actively plotting his ruin. On the screen, the traceback protocol was working, spreading through David's network, capturing every file, every email, every hidden communication. A folder, encrypted and hidden deep within the system, was suddenly unlocked by the protocol. It was labeled Project Eclipse. Inside were the plans for a hostile takeover of Sterling Innovations, timed to coincide with a manufactured scandal that would see Grant accused of selling his technology to a foreign rival. The evidence for the scandal? It was all being planted on Grant's own servers, using access codes only David possessed. They weren't just trying to rob him. They were trying to destroy him, to erase him. He saw their correspondence, meticulous plans, financial transactions, and a file containing the true identity of the woman known as Vanessa. Her real name was Rachel, a former intelligence operative turned corporate spy, with a long history of seducing and blackmailing powerful men. David had hired her over a year ago. Their entire relationship, from the chance meeting at a charity gala to the heartfelt proposal, had been a script, and he had played his part to perfection. The worst part was seeing their comments about him. David's detached, clinical assessment of his weaknesses. Rachel's mocking notes on his loneliness, on how easy it was to manipulate a man starved for affection. They had dissected him, analyzed him like a lab specimen, and used his own humanity against him. Grant leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, and buried his face in his hands. He didn't make a sound, but his whole body shook with the force of his grief and rage. He had built a fortress of firewalls and security, but he had left the front door wide open for the people he loved. But then he thought of Maya. He thought of her small, serious face, her clear, honest eyes. He thought of her quiet courage, her unwavering loyalty. In a world of sophisticated lies and devastating betrayals, a 10-year-old girl had been his only true ally. Her simple, unshakable truth was the one thing his enemies had never accounted for. They had called her invisible, and their blindness to her would be their downfall. He lifted his head, the grief receding, replaced by a steely, diamond-hard resolve. The pain was still there, a hot coal in his chest, but it was now fuel. They thought the game was over. They thought they had won. But they had only won a battle. He was about to end the war. He began to type, his fingers moving with a new, deadly precision. He copied every file, every incriminating email. He initiated a remote lockdown of David's office servers, freezing all the evidence in place. And he sent a single, encrypted message to a man he kept on retainer for emergencies, the head of a private security firm composed of ex-federal agents. The message was brief. It's time. Execute the plan. Full asset recovery. The targets are David Chun and an accomplice. They are at the main office now, and they have something of mine. He stood up and walked to the small basement window. The first, faint hint of dawn was coloring the eastern sky. A new day was beginning. For David and Rachel, it would be their last day of freedom. For him, it was the first day of the rest of his life. A life where trust would be harder to give, but more precious than ever. He thought of Maya and her mother, sleeping peacefully in their small apartment, unaware of the drama that had unfolded while they slept. He had a duty to protect them, not just from this threat, but from the fallout to come. He would not fail. His enemies had underestimated him. But more importantly, they had underestimated the watchful little girl in the hallway. In the sterile, blue light of the 40th floor office, David Chun and the woman known as Rachel were celebrating. The silver flash drive was plugged into David's computer, its contents spooling onto his secure server. On the large screen behind his desk, lines of what appeared to be code and schematics scrolled past. To them, it was the digital representation of a fortune, the final key to unlocking an empire. It's all here, David said, a grin spreading across his face. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of greed and relief. Every last bite. He never suspected a thing. Rachel, leaning against the edge of the desk, sipped from a glass of expensive scotch David had poured from his private bar. I told you he was easy, she said, her voice smooth and confident. Lonely men are the easiest marks. They want to believe the fairy tale so badly, they'll ignore every red flag. To a flawless execution, David said, raising his own glass. And to Project Eclipse. To us, Rachel corrected, her eyes meeting his over the rim of her glass. They were so absorbed in their victory, so certain of their success, that they didn't hear the whisper-quiet footsteps in the hallway. They didn't see the silent, black-clad figures taking up positions outside the glass doors of the office. The first sign that something was wrong was when the screen behind David's desk suddenly went black. A single line of white text appeared in its place. Project may bug. Trace complete. Asset secured. David stared at the screen, his smile faltering. What is this? What's may bug? Before Rachel could answer, the office doors swung open. 3 men in dark, tactical gear entered the room, moving with an unnerving silence and efficiency. They were followed by a fourth man, older, with a calm, authoritative face. He held up a badge. David Chun, Rachel Pearsons, the man said, his voice leaving no room for argument. You're under arrest for conspiracy, corporate espionage, and attempted fraud. David's face went white. Rachel's glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the polished floor. The spell of their victory was broken, replaced by the harsh, cold reality of capture. And then, Grant Sterling walked into the room. He didn't look angry. He didn't look hurt. He looked empty. His face was a mask of cold, devastating calm. He stopped in the center of the room, his eyes moving from David's stunned face to Rachel's panicked one. Grant, what is this? David stammered, trying to regain his composure. There's been a mistake. These men. There's no mistake, David, Grant said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of steel. The only mistake was yours. You thought I was a fool. I don't know what you're talking about, David blustered, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. Let me explain it to you, Grant said, taking a step closer. You hired a professional, Rachel here, to get close to me, to exploit my trust. You planted a listening device in my office, hidden in a painting, to spy on me. And tonight, you stole what you believed was the key to my life's work. Also, you could launch a hostile takeover and frame me for treason. Is that a fair summary? The color drained completely from David's face. He was speechless. Rachel, ever the professional, tried to find a way out. You have no proof, she said, her voice a thin imitation of its former confidence. Grant almost smiled. It was a cold, bitter expression. That's where you're wrong. The drive you stole? It was a decoy. The files on your server? A phantom. Every keystroke you just made, every file you thought you were copying, was tracked, recorded, and sent to a federal server as evidence. Your entire conspiracy, David, everything you've planned for the last year, is now a digital ghost that will haunt you for the rest of your life. David stared at him, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The sheer scale of the counter-operation was dawning on him. He had been played from the very beginning. How? He finally whispered. How did you know? Grant's cold gaze held him. You made one critical error, he said. You and your partner here. You believed that the only people who mattered in my house were the ones you paid attention to. You looked at the staff, the people who keep my life running, and you saw nothing. You saw ghosts. You saw furniture. He paused, letting the words hang in the silent room. You were so busy watching me, you never noticed the person who was watching you. The one person in that entire house who is honest and loyal and smarter than both of you put together. He looked past them, toward the hallway, as if seeing someone there. You were discovered by a 10-year-old girl, the maid's daughter. You called her invisible, but she saw everything. She saw the camera. She heard your whispers. She is the reason you are standing here in handcuffs tonight. You were taken down by a little girl you didn't even think was worth noticing. The finality of it, the sheer, poetic justice, was more devastating than any physical blow. They hadn't been outsmarted by a rival corporation or a federal agency. Their multi-million-dollar conspiracy had been unraveled by a child. The humiliation was absolute. As the security team led them away, David looked back at Grant, his face a mess of confusion, hatred, and shattered pride. A kid, he mouthed incredulous. Grant just stared back, his expression unchanging, until they were gone. 1 year later, the sunlight that streamed through the tall windows of the office no longer cast long, ominous shadows. It filled the room with a warm, welcoming light. The stormy seascape was gone, replaced by a large, cheerful painting Maya had made in her art class, a bright, colorful depiction of a sun-drenched field. The world knew the story, or at least, the version Grant had allowed it to know. David Chun and a ring of corporate spies had been convicted in a swift, quiet trial. The news had painted Grant as a brilliant victim who had turned the tables on his attackers. Sterling Innovations was more successful than ever. But the real changes were the ones that couldn't be measured on the stock market. They were the changes within the walls of the Grand Estate. Helen was no longer just the housekeeper. Grant had made her the official estate manager, tripling her salary and setting up a trust that would take care of her and Maya for the rest of their lives. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a calm confidence. She and Grant had developed a deep, respectful friendship, united by their shared love for Maya. Maya was no longer the quiet ghost in the hallways. She was the bright, vibrant heart of the home. She laughed freely. She ran through the corridors, and she no longer hesitated to enter any room she pleased. She was not a visitor. She was home. Grant had legally adopted her 6 months ago. The day the papers were signed, he had knelt before her, just as he had on that fateful day in his office. He had presented her not with a document, but with a small, silver locket. Inside, on one side, was a picture of her mother. On the other, a picture of him. Families aren't always the ones we're born into, he had told her, his voice thick with emotion. Sometimes, they're the ones we find, the ones we choose. And I choose you, Maya. Now, she sat on the thick Persian rug in his office, not as an intruder, but as a welcome presence. She was working on a school project, surrounded by papers and colored pencils. Grant sat at his desk, but he wasn't working on code. He was sketching a design for a new kind of swing set for the backyard. He looked up and watched her, a smile touching his lips. He was no longer the lonely billionaire, isolated in his fortress of technology. He was a father. The betrayal he had suffered had been deep, but the trust he had found was deeper still. Maya had not just saved his company. She had saved him from a life of sterile solitude. She had taught him that true security wasn't about firewalls and encryption. It was about connection. It was about listening. That night, as he tucked Maya into bed, a nightly ritual he cherished, she looked up at him with the same clear, observant eyes that had seen the truth when no one else had. "Grandpa would have liked you," she said simply. Grant's heart swelled. "I would have liked him too. He taught you well." "He taught me to see," Maya said. "You taught me that it's safe to speak." He kissed her forehead, overcome with gratitude for this small, wise soul who had reminded him what was truly important. The world was still a complicated place, full of shadows and deceit. But here, in this home, they had built something true and strong. They were a family, forged in crisis, bound by loyalty, and built on the foundation of a whispered warning. As he walked out of her room, he thought about the powerful lesson she had taught him. The most sophisticated security systems in the world can be breached. The most trusted friends can betray you. But sometimes, the greatest strength, the most unshakable truth, can be found in the smallest, quietest voice. The voice of someone others might overlook. You just have to be wise enough and still enough to listen. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening, maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. Thanks for spending this time with me.